Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. If you are looking for quality political analysis from someone who is independent and is not corrupted by corporate money or governmental money and even the so called non governmental money, then you are in the right place. On this channel, Syriana Analysis, I present to you almost daily live streamings, and we're discussing the current affairs in the world with greater focus on what's happening in Palestine, Israel, Ukraine, Syria, and also nowadays between Iran and Israel, right? Let's start with what Netanyahu said this week. In this live streaming, I'm going to divide the live streaming into three parts. In the first part, we're going to discuss what Netanyahu said about the two-state solution and how he challenged the Biden administration. And then we will also address the Israeli assassination of Iranian advisors and generals in Damascus in a residential area called Al Mazeh. And then we will discuss how Israel is getting ready for war against Lebanon. And finally, I will shortly shed light on the sad state of affairs in Ukraine. But let's start first with what Netanyahu said about the two-state solution.
For 30 years, I am very consistent, and I'm saying something very simple. This conflict is not on the lack of a state of Palestinian, but the existence of a state, the Jewish state. Every area that we evacuate, we receive terrible terror against that. It happened in South Lebanon, in Gaza, and also Judea and Samaria, which we did it. And therefore, I clarify that in any other arrangement, in the future, the state of Israel have to control on the entire area from the river to the sea. This is what happens when you have sovereignty. This truth I say to our American friends. And I also stopped the attempt to impose on us a reality that will jeopardize us. A prime minister in Israel has to be able to say no, even to the best of friends. To say no when you need to and to say yes when you can.
So, if you say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, then you are an anti Semite and you will be banned from all the platforms because they claim this decolonization slogan is used as a euphemism for extreme violence or genocide. But when Israeli propagandists on X post maps paint the entire area in west of the Jordan River with the Israeli flag, they will not be suspended or called anti Semites, right? Although one may argue that many Palestinians are Semites too. In a recent statement, as you watched, by Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister said, quote, "In the future, the state of Israel has to control the entire area from the river to the sea. This means all Palestinians will have to live under infinite occupation, subjugation, humiliation, oppression, and maiming by the Israeli occupation forces." I mean, you saw by yourself what are they doing to the civilians in Gaza, right? You saw the videos, you saw the footage. But this is not entirely the fault of Israel. It's also the fault of the United States. In October 1956, President Eisenhower confronted the tripartite aggression launched by the UK, France, and Israel against Jamal Abdel Nasser because he nationalized the Suez Canal. Eisenhower forced his allies to stop their brazen and illegal attacks, including through a US-sponsored UN General Assembly resolution. Following Eisenhower, we have John F. Kennedy, who brilliantly resolved the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, narrowly avoiding nuclear Armageddon by facing down his own warmongering advisors to reach a peaceful solution with the Soviet Union. But these days are over, right? As Jeffrey Sachs highly pointed out, today the military industrial complex is in full control of the White House, Pentagon, State Department, the Armed Services Committees of the Congress, and of course, the CIA, all in a tight embrace with the major arms contractors. While Israel faces highly credible charges of genocide in the International Court of Justice in a case brought by South Africa, instead of acting like Eisenhower and F. Kennedy and pressing Israel to end its slaughter in contravention of international law, including the Genocide Convention, Biden continues to ship munitions to Israel. Not only that, the US intervened on behalf of Israel and bombed Yemen to lift the Houthi blockade on cargo ships heading to Israel in a bid to stop the slaughter in Gaza. When you consider all this, Why would Netanyahu not seek to kill the two-state solution and vow for infinite occupation and genocide against the Palestinians? Now, this is something at the beginning about this. Now, there are some people who say, oh no, Netanyahu didn't say that. There is a mistake in the translation, etc. Because, as you may know, the Israeli channel, I think the 24, which first published this video, they deleted the video right away after they published it because they were probably told by the Israeli government to delete it. Now, this is the tweet of Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday. I want you also to focus on the time of the when he published it at 6:47 p.m. on January 20th. So yesterday at 6:47 p.m., right? And if you translate it, he says, "I will not compromise on full Israeli security control over the entire area west of Jordan, and this is contrary to a Palestinian state." So he repeated the same thing that he said in this statement. So the people who are saying that this is inaccurate and there is a misinterpretation and mistranslation, etc., it's a lie. So just bear in mind that he tweeted this at 6:47 yesterday, right? And now, if I show you what Ben Gavir said in this regard, similarly, right? In Hebrew, if you translate it, he says, "I do deny a Palestinian state always." And check the time. He published it at 6:37. So there is 10 minutes difference between Netanyahu's tweet and Ben Gavir's tweet. It's the same. They both lie in the same context, right? And in the same meaning. So I do really wonder if they were coordinating together or they publish it on purpose together at the same time on Twitter. And by doing so, they're simply sending a message to the Biden administration. And also, they're challenging the Biden administration and they're telling the Biden administration that we're not going to accept a two-state solution. And there is only going to be one state solution, and there's only going to be one state, Zionist state, and all Palestinians either live under subjugation of a Zionist state, subjugated under a Zionist state, or they would be expelled, right? And I think that's the main cause or the main goal of the Gaza war, and that is to break the infrastructure and destroy the infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, to make it uninhabitable. So even if the war is over, the people would seek to migrate and take refuge in other countries instead of living and restarting their livelihoods in the Gaza Strip. That's the reason why the Israeli forces are carpet bombing the Gaza Strip. And that is why the South African side, they correctly accuse the Israeli side of committing genocide. It is one way or another an ethnic cleansing, because this is what they say that they're going to do. And if any Palestinian comes and says from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, blah, 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 then they're an anti-Semite. But when the Israelis do that, it's normal. And see who from the Israeli side is saying it's the prime minister. It's the ministers. I think Ben Gavir is the national security minister, right? So high-ranking ministers are saying these things. Now imagine if anyone comes from the Palestinian authority, says from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and they're like, oh my God, you're an anti-Semite, you want to do Holocaust against the Jewish people, right? This is how they do it. Now, in order to see what's happening with the between the Biden administration and Netanyahu, and this is the topic of today's video, and this is the title of today's video, right? Biden speaks with Netanyahu after Israeli Prime Minister rejects U.S. post-war vision. So they spoke finally. Just for you guys to know, technically speaking, all the blue is just a normal, let's say, I'm trying to summarize it. So in the blue is the summaries, and in the green is the quotations, just for you to know. President Joe Biden spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today for the first time in a month, a day after Netanyahu used a nationally televised press conference to attack the United States' vision for a post-Gaza war peace plan. Quote, whoever is talking about the day after Netanyahu is essentially talking about the establishment of a Palestinian state. Netanyahu said in a confrontational televised news conference Thursday that rejected the US vision for the post-war that would include an Israeli-Saudi normalization deal for some sort of two-state solution that would give Palestinians more autonomy. In any future arrangement, Netanyahu said, Israel must remain or maintain security control of all the territory, including Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. This contradicts the idea of sovereignty for the Palestinians, Netanyahu said. I tell the truth to our American friends, he said. Just for a second. Yeah. Biden today seemed to brush off the disagreement. He said, I think we will be able to work something out, Biden told reporters this afternoon on the sidelines of remarks to a conference that he was attending. And Biden said there are a number of types of two-state solutions, noting there are countries with UN seats that do not have their own militaries. And he said, and so I think there are ways which this could work out. In the 30 to 40 minutes call, the president, this is John Kirby, then he's commenting on the phone call between Biden and Netanyahu, and he said the president reiterated his strong conviction in the viability of a two-state solution, understanding, of course, that we are not going to get there tomorrow, that there is an active conflict going on, blah, blah, blah. And this is just like, this is his conviction, but we are going to listen to your conviction, etc., etc. We're going to take into consideration your concerns and your interests, etc. Like, all this talk that Biden is trying to say, there are different types of two-state solutions. Some states do not have armies of themselves. And then John Kirby comes and says, this is the conviction of Joe Biden, but, maybe we have to listen to the Israelis, etc., etc. This all raises the question, who is in charge here? Israel is in charge of the U.S. foreign policy, or the U.S. foreign policy, or the U.S. is in charge of its own foreign policy? This is a serious question that everybody wants to know the answer, right? And I think it's not an easy question, and there is no easy answer to it. It's not like I'm going to come and say, no, Israel is in charge of the U.S. foreign policy, or I'm going to say the U.S. has an independent foreign policy. The answer is more complicated than that, and the answer is it's a mixture of both. Israel of course, has a huge influence over the US foreign policy, and I'm going to come and explain that, and I'm going to back up my arguments with the arguments of Kim Iverson, who was recently on a podcast or an interview, and she explained that eloquently. I want to show you that, of course, but at the same time, I do think that there is an intersection of interest between the Americans and the Israelis that forces or makes the United States foreign policy organically or naturally be pro-Israeli in any ways, So what did John Kirby said again in this regard? He also said, but as we are talking about post-conflict Gaza, you can't do that without also talking about the aspirations of the Palestinian people. He added, and what that needs to look like for them. So we're going to continue to have conversations. Now, this is the first time they say Netanyahu, he opened fire against Biden, or he challenged him publicly. And this is the analysis of an expert in this regard. And he says Netanyahu picked a fight with Biden because he thinks it helps himself politically at home, said Natan, director of the Brookings Institute Center for Middle East Policy. Quote, Netanyahu has now opened a public front with Joe Biden, and Joe Biden, unlike Barack Obama, has gained enormous credit from the Israeli public, enormous, historic, on the level of Truman and Kissinger, and he can use it. I don't think he needs to be cautious about potentially appearing to interfere in Israeli matters. Biden could make the case that the United States is heavily involved and has a high interest in the successful resolution of the Israel-Hamas conflict. Quote, and also say it to the Israeli public. And Joe Biden is in a perfect position to say it. Biden has enormous goodwill in Israel. He could use it. And I don't think he needs to be timid. The one who is on his heels here is Netanyahu. He is the one who is in dire straits. And he is the one now trying to pick a fight that he thinks will help him. So Netanyahu, for domestic reasons, because his popularity is not the highest nowadays in among his own people, and there are so many people blaming him for the attacks that happened on the 7th of October, and him not predicting or preventing or preempting against the attacks of Hamas. So Also, the case of the hostages in the Gaza Strip, that he promised that he will liberate them through the military means. All of these goals that he set up and presented to his people, one of which is his electoral motto, which is security for Israel, have fallen. Therefore, his popularity is decreasing as we speak. So, one of the things that he's trying to do is to show to his people that he is a strong man and he can challenge even the United States. This is according to, of course, several experts who agree that Netanyahu's internal let's say him, like his position in Israel, that is very dire and very difficult, and many leaders historically they try to export their problems to the outside world or try to play the tough guy role to give the impression to their people that they are in charge and they know what they're doing. And I think in this case the analyst Sachs, he was correct. Biden has lots of leverage over Israel and over Netanyahu, but he's not using that. So the question is why he's not using that. That's the real question, right? And I think Biden, unlike, of course, for example, Obama was accused of being pro-Iranian because he was trying to strike a very good deal with the Iranians and about the nuclear program, and which is, if you think about it strategically, it's in the interest of the Israelis. But because Netanyahu and his radical team, they truly believe that Iran has to continue in its nuclear program, so that this presents a threat on Israel. And when there is a threat against Israel, they can militarize their country, they can spend more money on their defense budget, and they can also act in the region in a way that there is an existential threat against them in order to attract more support, foreign aid, military aid, financial aid, economic aid to Israel, and also keep the flow of the cash and the money from the United States, including in defense budget, right? This is what I believe, and I also believe that Israel wants Iran to be a threat or pretend that there is a threat coming, a nuclear threat against Israel, an existential threat, so that they can find justifications for their expansion in the Palestinian territories and also in the Golan Heights and in Lebanon and elsewhere with all their bombing campaigns. I mean, if Iran doesn't represent any threat to Israel, then why the Israel is bombing Syria, and then they say we're bombing Iranians, right? If Iran is no longer presenting that threat, so they want for Iran to be a threat. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu and the radical Zionists in Israel, they were keen to exert pressure on Trump to cancel the nuclear deal with Iran, because they wanted for Iran to continue to be a threat against them. This is how they thrive, when there is a foreign threat against them. This is a very, in my opinion, sick way of seeing things in the region. Now, John Kirby, of course, he was asked about this statement by Benjamin Netanyahu, and they ask him if he condemns, because this is something that when the Palestinians use, the Americans condemn it, right? From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is condemned under by the American administration. But when it's used by the Israelis, does the United States condemn that?
Did the president address Netanyahu's use of the phrase "from the river to the sea" in their conversation today? I know the White House has previously said that phrase is divisive. So
I'm not aware that that specific phrase was discussed.
And him using that phrase.
Look, there's a connotation with that phrase. We've talked about this before, but when when you use the phrase "river to the sea," it speaks basically to the mantra of Hamas and in their manifesto, where they basically describe the geographic bounds of what they believe to be Palestine. And if you look at it on the map, if you go look at the four corners that they describe it, it's basically the state of Israel. They just don't believe it should exist. So again, it's not a phrase that that we recommend using, given because of that context.
This wasn't Hamas. This was.
I understand. I don't have anything more on that.
Did the president?
He doesn't have anything more than that, guys. If this is not a word salad, what is it? He's just jumping over the ideas, not trying to condemn Israel, right? They will never condemn Israel. And this is the big question. Who is in charge? Why the United States can't condemn Israel? Why can't they criticize Israel? Why Israel is so important for the United States? Why Israel is able to tarnish the reputation of politicians in the United States? Why Israel has so much leverage over the foreign policy of the United States? Why there is so much intersection of interest between the United States and Israel? Is it only because they're somehow strong in among, because Zionists are from different religions and from different, by the way, school of thoughts, etc., etc. Not school of thoughts, but different sects and different. I mean, there are even Zionist Arabs, just for you to know, and Zionist Muslims. So I don't mean the Jews in particular. I mean the Zionists, right? Why do they have so much influence over the United States foreign policy? And this is a question was asked Kim Iverson. I really liked her answer here. She was on Rachel's show, and I'm going to show you what she said. I think she summarized it correctly here.
Isn't it interesting? It does seem like the United States has completely lost the influence that the U.S. once had over Israel. It just seems that Israel has, and this is there are people that definitely disagree with me on this. There are people that I've had on my show, like Trita Parsi, for example, who believes that the Biden administration is just not wielding their power strong enough, that there is still a lot of U.S. influence over Israel. The U.S. is just refusing to use it for a variety of reasons. But I think the fact they're refusing to use it is an indicator that actually Israel has gained the upper hand over the decades, that they have, their lobby is very powerful. They've got very big donors that are American citizens who are still very much personally, emotionally invested in the Zionist project of Israel. They want to see Israel flourish, and they will punish American politicians who don't go along with that. So they know that, I think that the American political class understands that if they don't go along and just kind of write that blank check and do whatever Israel wants, that the lobby will come for them, whether they rip their own donors, and some of them aren't even taking donations from the Israel lobby, but they know that they will give donations to an opponent to oust them from office. So I think I think Netanyahu is showcasing the power now that Israel has gained over the United States political system. And by basically saying, F you, old man, like, we don't care, we're going to do what we want. Oh, you want us to do a two-state solution? No, we're not going to do that. And then publicly saying we're not going to do it. But it's actually not new. Netanyahu has said for years, there's even a clip that I actually just put on my Twitter the other day of him 8 years ago announcing that he was not, and this was during the tail end of the Obama administration, saying that he was not going to allow a two-state solution. He was looking to be reelected. He was going around Israel and advocating the voters, saying, come out to vote for me, or else the Arabs are going to get together and vote. And when they vote, then they're going to put somebody else in power. And as long as I'm here, there will be no Palestinian state. He made that very, very clear. And that was way before October 7th, way before any of these latest. So he's never had an interest in this. And the U.S., as much as the U.S. over the decades has said, oh, yeah, we want to broker a two-state solution deal, it's never happened. So, so that makes me actually think not only has the United States lost the upper hand with Israel. I don't know. I think we lost it a long time ago. I don't think it's recent.
Yeah, they lost it a really long time ago, according to Kim Iverson. She's a brilliant political commentator. If you like to follow her work, she's on YouTube and on Rumble as well. And the question here is why Netanyahu is doing this, right? One question that we know the answer now, that the leverage of the lobby in the United States is so big over the politicians that even if a politician, a congressman, a congresswoman is not receiving funding from this lobby, but the moment you speak against the Zionist project in the region, in the Middle East or abroad, then you will be destroyed. And your opponents will receive funding so that they destroy you and they win in the elections. And in any political campaign, because in the United States, mashallah, the foreign money is just playing everywhere, playing a huge role, then those who have bigger, let's say, financial support, then they will win. And because the United States is no more these politicians do no longer represent the interests of the people, but they represent the interests of the corporations. They represent the interests of the donors, including the lobbies. So this is the reason why Netanyahu is confidently challenging the Biden administration, well knowing that there will be no consequences on Israel. And the Americans cannot condemn and criticize Israel because, look, Biden is over already. But there are so many people in the Biden administration who are still aspiring to have roles and positions in the future. Once you are in a position of power, you don't want to leave that place, right? This is the nature of the human. So we have to see it not only from the collective perspective, but also from the individual perspective. And that is, these people have careers, and the money in the United States plays an important role in the political life. And these people want to have their jobs kept, right, in the future. I mean, people like Nuland, they keep their jobs for decades. People like John Kirby, people like the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. There are so many people who are bureaucrats. They're not like elected by the people. They are in the Pentagon, they are in the State Department, they are in the CIA, etc. And those people want to keep their jobs. Therefore, they don't want to go against the Zionist interests in fear of losing their jobs. Guys, we have around 250 people watching this live streaming. I appreciate all of you. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please hit the like button while you're watching, because it attracts more people and more people will see this live streaming, and also more people will see it on their timeline when this live streaming is over. Thank you so much. So this is the first question that we answered today. Why the Biden administration cannot control Netanyahu and cannot condemn Netanyahu in this regard, and who is in charge of who. I said it's complicated, but the Israelis have, or the Zionists have, an enormous influence over the foreign policy of the United States. Now, Israel assassinated this week 4 Iranian generals in Syria, advisors, in the middle of Damascus in a residential area. Israel assassinated 4 Iranian advisors in Damascus belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. This was yesterday. Their names are Hoyatollah Omidvar, Ali Akadzida, Hossein Mohammadi, and Saeed Karimi. I ask this question: is this the response of Israel to the bombing of Mossad headquarters in Erbil? Probably. Will Iran respond? Definitely. The question is where. I rule out that the Iranian response would be in or from Syria. Iran understands the domestic situation in Syria, where US-backed terror groups in Idlib, Al-Tanaf, and the deserts are waiting for a direct Syrian engagement with Israel, hence the expansion of the war to seize the opportunity and advance in government-held areas. And here I'm going to show you the map of control over Syria, just for you guys to know. So this green area, which is occupied by the Americans, there are so many militants in this zone, and on the periphery of the zone, they are trained by the United States, and they're waiting the right opportunity when there is a direct confrontation or engagement between the Syrian army and Israel here, so that the Syrian army sends reinforcement to the south. They're waiting this opportunity to do what exactly? I will tell you. They want to seal this part to Al-Qaim. So if this green area expands to this yellow area, then the United States will have full control on all the borders between Syria, which is here from the left, because the Americans are also on the left, all the area from Iraq coming here down and sealing it to here. So the entire border between Iraq and Syria will be completely sealed, and therefore the entire also connectivity between Iran, Tehran, and Syria will be sealed. If Iran cannot come from Iraq to Syria, then Iran cannot access Syria. And if Iran can't access Syria, Iran can't access also Lebanon. If Iran can't access Syria, also they can't access the Mediterranean. So geopolitically speaking, what the Americans are going to do, if there is a direct engagement between Syria and Israel, and Syria is busy in a foreign or external war against Israel, these sleeping cells here in the green, they're going to seal this border. And these black ISIS cells, they will try to occupy the deserts again, And this green area, which is occupied by Al-Qaeda, they will try to advance again to Aleppo. So this is a very dangerous scenario. Many people ask me why Syria doesn't engage in a war against Israel, among other factors. Of course, this is the main factor, that Syria is in a volatile situation, and these militants can be revived again, and these sleeping cells can play a role again inside the country and occupy territories once again. So Syria's priority is to keep the country now intact in terms of the controlling these all red areas, and try to at least liberate Idlib, which is the largest safe haven for Al Qaeda terrorists in the world. But another reason why the United States wants to seal this border, because as you can see, this area is completely sealed already, and this area is open with Iraq. But if they seal all this area, what is going to happen is, from China to Syria, which there are roads for the Silk and Road Initiative, they will pass through Syria, right? If they want to go and access to the Mediterranean again. And they will also, by doing so, block the Chinese access to the Mediterranean, Chinese access to the Levant, and also try to sabotage the Silk and Road Initiative of the Chinese. The third reason why the Americans are here, and on the left side, in a previous live streaming, I told you that Israeli radicals in Israel, they also preach that they will occupy between the river in the Nile here. They say we will occupy in Egypt from the Nile to the Euphrates here. And I will tell you, Great Israel map. If you see the Great Israel map, and you can see what areas are they preaching here, this blue area, and you can see that the Americans are already here, so they are they want to keep this piece of cake to the Kurdish people, and this is what the Israelis want, to have a border with the Kurds on this area and occupy all these regions, according to the radical Zionists who preach for what is called the Great Israel. Will they be able to do that? I completely rule out that. But if they speaking about it, they will try to do it. But since the Israelis bombed Damascus and they killed these 4 generals, I want to remind you all, guys, this is from 2022, I think, yeah, that the Israelis coordinate all the time with the Americans before they bomb Syria, and the Americans know what the Israelis are doing in Syria. So also the American side gives a green light to Israel before bombing Syria. This is from the Wall Street Journal in 2022. It says Israel secretly coordinates with the US on many of the airstrikes it carries out in Syria as the allies face a battlefield crowded with militant groups, Iranian-backed militias, and foreign militaries, according to current and former US officials. American officials have said little about Israel's bombing missions, which have been aimed at interrupting Tehran's flow of advanced weapons to Lebanese Hezbollah and diminishing Iran's military forces and proxies in Syria. Behind the scenes, however, many of Israel's missions for several years have been reviewed in advance for approval by senior officials at US Central Command and at the Pentagon. The vast majority of those Israeli airstrikes have been approved by the United States. And you can see the locations of the airstrikes of the Israeli side here and how they coordinate with the American side. And I also heard something, I don't know how credible it is and how legitimate it is, but keep in mind, and I will do more research about this, I heard that the Israelis are using Starlink to locate specific locations in Syria, and also use their GPS systems to hit specific locations to assassinate people in Syria and also in Lebanon. And they say that this one that was in Al-Mazze is a residential area, it's highly populated area in the middle of Damascus. The claim is that, I'm not saying it's true, I'm just saying the claim, that this time for sure the Israelis use Starlink to locate the position and hit it correctly, and the entire building, the residential building, was unfortunately destroyed in order to kill these 4 Iranian advisors in Syria. So if you link this one to the previous segment of this show, and that is why Israel wants for Iran to be a threat. If Iran is no more a threat to Israel, then they will not have a free hand to fly and bomb Syria, Lebanon, and in other regional countries in a bid to strike what is called Iranian targets. And I just want to say something here. I'm not an advocate for violence, but if we take the logic of Israel and say the Iranians pose a threat on Israel, they're in Syria. They have advisors in Syria. And what if the Iranians use the same logic and say, the Americans are in Israel, the Brits are in Israel, and they pose a security threat to me, and now I have to bomb Israel. And I have to kill the American CIA, Pentagon officials, right? Those Iranian who were killed in Syria and assassinated were officials. They have an official status, right, in the Iranian army. So I think, of course, this is a twisted mentality, right? But this is how Israel presents its case. And I just want to say also, this attack in Damascus, if it was a response for the Iranians assassinating or bombing Erbil the other day, and the Iranians claimed that they bombed Mossad headquarters, then this will give a legitimacy to the Iranian argument, because they said that they bombed a Mossad headquarters, and if Israel responds and retaliates now in Syria against Iranian targets, then what Iran said about the Israeli headquarters, it was correct, because so many people tried to ridicule that argument, right? Now, there is another news, which is, I don't know what it means yet. I will dig in and I will get you the correct interpretation. But Russian aircraft begin patrolling the Syrian-Israeli disengagement line. The Russian aerospace forces have begun aerial patrols along the so-called Bravo line that divides the Golan Heights between Syria and Israel. The deputy chief of the Russian Center for Reconciliation of the Opposing Parties in Syria, a division of the Russian Defense Ministry, said, quote, to monitor the situation, Army aviation units of the Russian aerospace forces have organized aerial patrols along the disengagement line separating the armed forces of Israel and the Syrian Arab Republic, the Bravo line, Rear Admiral Vadim Kulit says. Now, you may want to know how the map looks like. I wrote you the map. This is the Bravo line, guys. So this is the Golan Heights, which is occupied by Israel, which is a Syrian territory. And this is the Sea of Galilee, which was a highly important lake here, which were under negotiations between the Israeli side and the Syrian side in the past decades when they were trying to find a solution about the Golan Heights. And this is the Bravo line. So this is where the Russians are flying their aerospace fighter jets and patrolling this area. I don't know what are they trying to do, to be honest with you. Are they trying to watch what the Israelis are doing? Because at many times the Israeli side comes to the Golan Heights and they shoot on Damascus and they come back. But this is over the Golan Heights, or they come from the I will show you again the map of control over Syria. So people ask me why. So this is Israel, right? And when the fighter jets fly, they either come here to the regional waters and they come to Lebanon and they bomb from Lebanon, Syria, right? And Lebanon is not Syrian airspace anyways, but they come either to the regional waters and they penetrate the airspace of Lebanon and they bomb from here, either from the regional waters or over Lebanon, or they come to the Golan Heights, this blue place, and they again shoot against Damascus. At some times, only rarely, but they come also fly over Jordan. They come to the Al Tanaf border crossing to this green area. And the Americans here start activating their jamming technologies so that the Syrian side goes blind and cannot see what's happening. And they come here to the green area and they shoot in positions against either here Al-Qaim, against what they call Iranian-linked militias or Iranian-backed militias, or against the Syrian army. So there are different ways of Israel bombing Syria, but in all cases, they don't penetrate the airspace of Syria. The last time they penetrated the airspace of Syria was in 2018, and back then one F-16 of the Israelis were shot down. So 300 people watching, great. If you hit the like button, I would really appreciate that, guys, while you're watching that. Now, Israel is not only trying to, this is the third part of this live streaming, there is much talk about also opening a new front against Lebanon. I know there are some skirmishes between Hezbollah and Lebanon, but there is a serious talk now that Israel would go and open a front, a big one, against Lebanon, wage a ground offensive and try to create a buffer zone so that they kick Hezbollah away from the borders, because there are tens of thousands of Israeli settlers who live in northern Israel, and those were forced, I think the number is between 60 to 80,000, they are forced to leave all these settlements and go in deep or in deep in Israel, and they're not able to come back to their homes. And this is representing a security challenge, a social challenge on the Israeli authorities. They want them to go back to their homes, but because Hezbollah is keep firing on these settlements, so they want for Hezbollah to be removed from the borders, and Hezbollah says, no, ceasefire first, and then we stop shooting. And Israel says there is no ceasefire. So what is the solution? Israel says the solution is military, because there were envoys from France, envoys from the United States in Beirut, and they had their negotiations and talks with the Lebanese officials, and the Lebanese officials talked with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah said, no, we're not going to stop shooting until Israel agrees on a ceasefire deal with the Gaza Strip. So this is the Hezbollah condition, but the Israelis do not accept that. So what's the solution? Israel believes in escalation against Hezbollah, and I think that would be a horrible mistake. This is the Israeli Occupation Forces Chief of Staff telling his soldiers in the north to prepare for a war with Lebanon, and that forces that retreated from Gaza will help them. The goal is to return the 230,000 settlers that fled from Hezbollah strikes. So the number is over 200,000, guys. Sorry, I said 60 to 80,000. So around quarter million Israelis had to flee from northern Israel because of the Hezbollah threat. Take a look. I will just give this.
אימונים תמיד היו דבר מאוד חשוב, אני חושב שהרבה יותר חשוב עכשיו. אנחנו עושים פרק של הגברת מוכנות ללחימה בלבנון. יש לנו הרבה מאוד לקחים מהלחימה בעזה. רבים מהם רלוונטיים מאוד ללחימה בלבנון, ויש כאלה שחייבים לעבור התאמה. אנחנו רוצים להגיע בלבנון למטרה מאוד ברורה. זה להחזיר את התושבים לצפון, כל היישובים בצפון. אנחנו מבינים שהדבר הזה חייב לעבור דרך שינוי מאוד משמעותי. אני לא יודע מתי המלחמה בצפון. אני יודע להגיד לכם שהסבירות לזה שהיא קורית בחודשים הקרובים היא הרבה יותר גבוהה ממה שהיה בעבר. אני יודע להגיד לכם שאני חושב שאנחנו מתחילים אותה עם הרבה יותר יתרונות. ניצחון, ביטחון עצמי אצלנו, ביטחון יורד אצלם, הרבה מאוד ניסיון, יכולות, הפתעות לייצר, התקדמויות שנעשו. מה שנשאר, להתאמן ברצינות, רוח חזקה של האנשים, וכשנצטרך אנחנו נלך קדימה בכל הכוח.
I don't want to ridicule him much, but I think we say in Arabic, al-hakim ala gamruk, which means the talk has no taxes on it, so you can say whatever you want when you have a tongue. And I truly believe that this would be a huge miscalculation from the Israeli side if they want to wage a war against Lebanon. I truly believe that if they open a true front, they will not be able to match the competence of the Hezbollah side. I've been talking about this for quite some time. And therefore, this will drag the Americans into a regional war. And the Americans were trying to, reduce the flares of this war. They don't want for Hezbollah to intervene, and they don't want there to be a huge regional war all of a sudden. And what would happen to the global economy if the Houthis start striking the American fuel interests in the region or the cargo ships, and what happens when the Iranians start shooting on American interests in the Gulf states? What will happen if the Hezbollah side starts firing precision missiles on the air bases in Israel? Where will the fighter jets land? Then what will be the fate of the warships and the aircraft carriers, etc., etc.? Those are all important questions, right? The Americans telling the Israelis, don't do it. And they have been telling them this since October 2023, but the Israelis say they're determined to do it. And in my opinion, I'm telling you, this would be a huge miscalculation, a very big one. And they will regret doing it if they do it. And this is an article coming from the Washington Post. This is, again, 2 days ago. They say the high stakes diplomatic scramble to avert an Israel-Lebanon war. As Israel announces a drawdown of its forces in northern Gaza, the United States is working to head off a second full-scale war in Lebanon, with Israeli officials warning that time for diplomacy is running out. Israel told Washington in late December that if a long-term border agreement cannot be reached with Lebanon over the next several weeks, according to Western diplomat and 3 Lebanese officials, Israel will escalate its fight with Hezbollah, a scenario the Biden administration and European countries have tried strenuously to avoid. The officials familiar with the talks understood that Israel was eyeing the end of January as a target for coming to an agreement, which means we have around 10 days for the end of this month. So let's see. The Israelis have not put forward a hard deadline for when they will step up their military campaign against Hezbollah, a senior US official told the Washington Post. But he acknowledged that the window for negotiations is narrowing. White House envoy Amos Hochstein, by the way, I think he served in the Israeli army, arrived in Beirut last week to pass on Israel's proposals for a preliminary solution to the conflict. The proposal, as described by Lebanese officials and the Western diplomat, calls for Hezbollah to withdraw its troops a few miles north and for the Lebanese army to increase its presence in the area, creating a de facto buffer zone between the militants and the Israeli border. Hezbollah's leader do not want a full-blown war with Israel, 2 U.S. officials said, but they may be opposed to striking a border deal while hundreds of Palestinians are still being killed each day in Gaza. The talks led by Hochstein at least provide the possibility of a detente and a roadmap for the two sides to follow once the fighting subsides in Gaza, the official said. Yet Israel has given no indication that a ceasefire is imminent, and its clock on negotiations with Lebanon appears to be ticking down. A border deal, in theory, allows some 70,000 displaced Israelis to return to their homes in the north, a priority for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Publicly, Hezbollah has seemed to reject the Israeli proposal. In a speech on Sunday, the group's leader Hassan Nasrallah repeated his position that a ceasefire in Gaza is a precursor to any diplomatic talks or a cessation of fighting on the border. Washington has been, I don't know why this one now. Washington has been pressuring Lebanon for Israel's sake to stop disable this front, Nasrallah said. Let the aggression on Gaza stop, and after that we can discuss issues that concern Lebanon. What do you think about this case, guys? Do you think that Israel will follow its threats and they will wage a war against Lebanon? They will, and when we say war, which means bombing not only southern Lebanon but Beirut, and using excessive force, breaking the rules of engagement, trying to wage a ground offensive in order to create what is called a buffer zone in southern Lebanon. I've been saying this, like, if you think about it logically, Israeli shouldn't do that, but most of the things that the current Israeli government is doing is already negating logic. So I will not rule out that possibility. There are really crazy people in the Israeli government nowadays. And they seem to be on a suicidal mission for themselves and for their sake and for their own interests and for their own presence and for their own security, right? This is just this is what I see in this regard. And the West is also worried about all these escalations because they are not winning these wars in Middle East and in Ukraine. This is coming from the Modern Diplomacy Journal. The title says The West's Nightmare, How Russia and Hamas Are Winning the Geopolitical Wars. The West is losing ground to its rivals as time passes. This is the reality that the US and Europe are facing more than ever. The situation in Ukraine is stagnant, and the war fatigue has hampered and sometimes halted the aid to Kiev. The prospect of Trump's re election as the US president looms over Ukraine as a frightening possibility. The war in Gaza is not going well for Israel and its Western allies, and Israel's land and tunnel operations will take a long time. Biden and the European leaders, for both electoral and normative geopolitical reasons, want to end the war and broker a ceasefire. Meanwhile, this passage of time benefits Russia and Hamas, and any outcome that validates their victory claims will undermine the credibility and weaken the norms of the West, as well as diminish its influence in the two vital geopolitical regions of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. If the current trend persists, 2024 will be the year when the West, especially Europe, will pay the price for its losses. However, Europe is suffering. This is not a Russian website, by the way, and she's criticizing Europe here. She says Europe is suffering the consequences of the US hegemonic ambitions and its dependence on Washington. This time, the price will be higher than ever and will erode the reputation and influence of Europe in many parts of the world and even within its own continent. This is the familiar tale of Europe's failures in recent years. Failures that resulted from blindly following Washington. However, this time the Europeans might want to heed the Chinese proverb. If you make a mistake and do not correct it, this is called a mistake, and avoid paying for the year's greed again. And speaking of China, because she mentioned China the other day, I saw this statement of Xi Jinping. I thought you might be interested in it. Xi Jinping recently, in 2023, he stated this. He said, Western modernization was fraught with sanguineous crimes such as war, slave trade, colonization, and plunder, which inflicted untold misery on developing countries. Having suffered from aggression, bullying, and humiliation by Western powers, we Chinese are keenly aware of the value of peace and will never follow the beaten path of the West. The biggest problems with Western modernization are that it is capital centered rather than people centered, and that it seeks to maximize capital gains rather than serve the interests of the vast majority of the people. Do you think that the Chinese are bluffing, guys? Do you think that the Chinese have also colonial aspirations and now they're presenting themselves as a peaceful country and then they may change that? Or do you really think that the Chinese have a different set of values and spiritually, religiously, human norms, like the entire civilization is different? What do you think about that? Or do you think that the current economic boom in China may corrupt them in the future because they have the fastest growing economy nowadays in the world? And I wanted to show you a video of Kushner. Of course, Jared Kushner, because we were speaking about Ukraine in the past article, he says Putin knows history and feels threatened by the West because Russia was attacked 5 times in the last 500 years from the eastern side of, the western flank or side of his country. I think this is a very interesting take from Jared Kushner, and I think you would be interested in it because he explains a point of view that is rarely heard or told in the western side of the world, and something that to consider, in my opinion.
I think with Putin, he's a student of history from the things that I saw with him. If you look at Russia over the last 500 years, I think they were attacked by the Polish in early 1600. I think they were attacked by the Swedes in the 1700s. I think they were attacked by Napoleon in the 1800s. And then In the 1900s, they were attacked by Germany twice. And so from his perspective, there is, in the early days of Russia, they were attacked by the Mongols. They were very vulnerable. And a lot of the geography of Russia today is really designed for defensive purposes, that they have natural barriers that makes them easier to defend. And Russia's a massive landmass. It's twice the size of America. They have 11 time zones in the country. And so I do think that for Vladimir Putin, his biggest concern is, how do we create a security paradigm in the west of his country that won't be a creep? And I think that there's like two different parts of the mindset. The people who are most cynical of Putin will say, well, he's just trying to recreate the USSR. He's being expansionist. And the people who want to be sympathetic to him will say, well, if you think about it, the Russian perception of the NATO arrangement was that they wouldn't be expanding westward. Over the last years, they've included all these countries that they said they promised they wouldn't include. Who knows what the promises were or weren't. But what I do know from his perspective is allowing Ukraine into NATO was always a red line. And that's why we never offered it. We never provoked it. We never brought it up. We said, we're going to arm them. And we basically said, just calm down. We don't want any conflicts there. We have bigger issues and bigger opportunities to work from. So I do think you have to think through what's a paradigm that he can accept.
So this is a very interesting take from Jared Kushner about Russia's intentions towards the NATO and why the Russians waged this offensive against Ukraine, and they're capturing territories in Ukraine and including it to the Russian Federation. Something that not many American officials consider, but it comes most of the time now from the conservatives, let's say, that they understand what's happening in Eastern Europe, but they somehow miss everything that is happening in the Middle East, because probably for them, we, the people in the Middle East, are just savages and we don't deserve to be treated equally or respectfully. We've just I don't know, I don't want to use more worse terms, but it's really sad, that we have lots of these so-called anti-war conservatives or the Republicans all of a sudden became hardcore Zionists, but when it comes to Ukraine, they understand it. But the opposite is that the Democrats were like all in all with in this war in Israel and the war against Russia through the gate of Ukraine. And since we were speaking about Ukraine, guys, this is the last tweet I want to show you, which is very sad. This woman is just a normal woman. Her name is Maria Matejchuk, and she was recently in Ukraine, and she posted this, and it got so much, of course, blowback against her by the pro-Ukrainian side, because nobody wants to hear this perspective in outside of Ukraine. And she says, I just got back from Ukraine, where I was visiting some friends. Everything we have heard about what's happening in Ukraine is a lie. The reality is darker, bleaker, and unequivocally hopeless. There is no such a thing. Ukraine is winning this war. By their estimates, they have lost over 1 million of their sons, fathers, and husbands. An entire generation is gone. Even in the southwest, where the anti-Russian sentiment is long-standing, citizens are reluctant or straight-up scared to publicly criticize Zelensky. They will go to jail. In every village and town, the streets, shops, and restaurants are mostly absent of men. The few men who remain are terrified of leaving their homes for fear of being kidnapped into conscription. Some have resorted to begging friends to break their legs to avoid service. Army search parties take place early in the morning when men leave their homes to go to work. They ambush and kidnap them off the streets, and within 3-4 hours they get listed in the army and taken away straight to the front lines with minimal or no training at all. It's a death sentence. It's getting worse every day. Where I was staying, a dentist had just been taken by security forces on his way to work, leaving behind 2 small children. Every day, 3-5 dead bodies keep arriving from the front lines. Mothers and wives fight tooth and nail with the armed forces, beg and plead not to have their men taken away. They try bribing, which sometimes work, but most of the time they are met with physical violence and death threats. The territory celebrated as having been won back from Russia has been reduced to rubble and is uninhabitable. Regardless, there is no one left to live there, and displaced families will likely never return. They see the way the war has been reported at home and abroad. It's a joke and propaganda. They say, look around. Is this winning? Worse, some have been hoaxed into believing that once Ukrainian forces are exhausted, American soldiers will come in to replace them and win the war. There is no ambiguity in these people. The war was for nothing, a travesty. The outcome always was and is clear. The people are hopeless, utterly destroyed, and living in an unending nightmare. They are pleading for an end, any end, most likely the same peace that could have been achieved 2 years ago. In their minds, they have already lost, for their sons, fathers, and husbands are gone, and their country has been destroyed. There is no victory that can change that. Make no mistake, they are angry. They are angry at Putin, with Putin, but they are also angry with Zelensky and the West. They have lost everything. Worst of all, hope and faith, and cannot comprehend why Zelensky wishes to continue the current trajectory, the one of human devastation. I didn't witness the war, but what I saw was absolutely heartbreaking. Shame on the people, regardless of their intentions, who have supported this war, and shame on the media for continuing to lie about it. This post got, like, as you can see, 2 million views, and of course lots of people in the comments are ridiculing her. Of course, most of these people in the comments who are ridiculing her are these armchair military experts who live probably in Poland, in Germany, in Sweden, in France, in safe places, probably in Philadelphia, I don't know, in some of the American states, but they're not on the front line, right? And they're not paying from their own blood, and they're not paying from their own family. So for them, Ukraine will win this war, and we have to support it as long as it takes. It's just something that is either ideologically driven or hate driven against Russia, right? The truth of the matter is, on this channel, I called for halting the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. From the early days, I called for a peace agreement between Russia and NATO. And in Palestine, I called for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. And I will continue doing that. I'm not a pro-war person, and that's why I present such a content to you guys, so that we together discuss and enlighten ourselves of what's happening in the world. I saw one of the commentators was saying something about Alistair Crook and how he called Biden a psychopath or something. I'm in touch now with Alistair Crook, and hopefully I will have him in the next 2 weeks. Let's see, because a person like him is very busy, so we have to find a time that also suits him. But in the next 2 weeks, as we say in Arabic, inshallah, I will definitely have him on my channel. So if you have any questions to him about these geopolitical conflicts in the region, Middle East, in also East Europe, between NATO and Russia, please post your comments under this video. I will go through these questions, and I will also pick the best ones and also ask him. And I will say this is from the audience of Syriana Analysis. But until then, thank you very much, guys, for watching this video. Please hit the like button before leaving this live streaming. And if you want to become a patron, which means you can support my work financially, the link is now scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And I will see you on Monday, so tomorrow, 5 p.m. Central European times. Salam.